The coffee ring on the cover of her father's journal was the first thing Isla noticed. Not Emmett, not the woman curled against him on the living room sofa, not even the bottle of Okanagan Red they had opened, the one Isla had been saving since the year her father's hands had grown unsteady to hold a scalpel, the year she'd gone home to sit beside him. She noticed the coffee ring on the worn leather cover of a journal that had never left the top shelf of her study, because it was the only handwritten record of 30 years of surgical cases that Dr. Isla Forsythe had ever kept, and it was sitting on the coffee table like a coaster. That was the moment, not the betrayal, the carelessness. Emmett looked up then, and his expression did not change. Not guilt, not even surprise. He looked at Isla the way a man looks at a courier who has arrived at the wrong address. "You're home early," he said. The woman beside him, Faye Hollis, Emmett's director of clinical partnerships, a woman Isla had sat across from at 4 company dinners, did not move. She had Isla's gray cashmere throw over her lap, the one Isla's father had chosen himself from a shop on Granville Island the Christmas before his diagnosis, and she was holding a glass of wine with the ease of someone who had been holding glasses of wine in this apartment for a long time. "Emmett," Isla said. Her voice came out even. She had gone somewhere inside herself that was very quiet. "How long?" It was not quite a question. It came out flat, almost gentle, the way you might ask someone what the weather had been while you were away. He shrugged. He actually shrugged. "Does it matter?" he said. "You've been so absorbed in your little hospital committees, running around with the foundation checkbook I provided. A man gets lonely, Isla. You were never really present." She looked at him for a moment. "How long?" she said again. "Long enough," he said. "You want to stand there in your coat and make a scene? Go ahead. But I'll tell you something first. This is my penthouse, my money, my life. You came into this marriage with nothing, a hospital volunteer with a grief you never fully came out of. I gave you all of this." He gestured at the apartment, the floor-to-soiling windows overlooking False Creek, the Italian marble in the kitchen, everything he had assembled and handed her like a gift. "Don't forget that. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you believe that a person's true worth lives in what they've built and what they carry in their own chest, not in what someone else chose to give them, then take 1 second right now and subscribe to this channel. Stay with me until the very end, because this story turns in ways you will not see coming, and do me a small favor. Leave a comment telling me the name of the city you're watching from. Right now, I want to know just how far this story has traveled. Now let me tell you what Emmett Carmichael did not know. Isla reached across the coffee table. She picked up her father's journal with both hands. "The way you handle something irreplaceable," and she held it against her chest. Then she reached up and slid her wedding band off her finger. It came off easily, as though it had been waiting. She set it on the kitchen counter without looking at it again. "Isla," Emmett said, and for the first time something flickered across his face. Not remorse. Just the thin crack of a man who has miscalculated. "Where do you think you're going to go? You don't have a career. You don't have your own accounts. You walked away from everything you were before you met me. And the moment you walk out that door, you go back to having nothing." She stopped at the threshold. She turned and looked at him for a long moment, and what unsettled Emmett, what he would turn over for months, was that there was no anger in her face, only something that looked like relief. "In 4 years," she said quietly, "you never once asked me why I walked away. You just assumed." She paused. "That's going to cost you far more than you can imagine right now." She packed one bag. It took less than 5 minutes. She took her father's journal, a change of clothes, and her passport. She left everything else he had paid for, because none of it had ever belonged to her in any way that mattered. She walked out into a November rain, the kind that comes sideways off English Bay, and hailed a cab on the street below. In the back seat, she pulled out a phone Emmett had never seen. Small and plain, with 3 numbers saved in it. She dialed the first. A woman answered on the second ring. "Dr. Forsythe," the voice said, and the name landed in her chest like something returning from a long distance. "We've been waiting." "It's time, Quinn," Isla said. "Start everything." A brief pause. "Once we begin, there's no quiet way to stop it." Isla looked out the window at the rain-blurred lights of the Canby Bridge. "I know," she said. "I've been ready for 2 years. I was just waiting for a reason to stop hoping. He gave me one tonight." In an office tower in downtown Vancouver, a small, careful team of people switched on their screens and got to work. To understand what came next, you have to understand the part Emmett Carmichael never bothered to learn. Isla Forsythe grew up in Kitsilano, the daughter of a cardiologist so respected in British Columbia that the corridor outside his former office at Vancouver General still bore a plaque with his name. Her mother had left when Isla was 9, and so it had been the two of them, Alistair and his daughter, at the kitchen table in the evenings. His medical texts spread out beside her homework, his voice explaining the chambers of the heart the way other fathers explained hockey standings. He made it feel like the most important subject in the world, because to him it was. Isla believed him. She took it all the way. She was the kind of student who read ahead not to impress teachers, but because the material genuinely kept her awake at night, turning problems over until something resolved. At 17, she won a National Science Award for a paper on ventricular repair. At 22, she graduated from UBC's Faculty of Medicine near the top of her class. By 28, she was completing a cardiothoracic surgery fellowship at the University of Toronto, and her supervising surgeons were saying things to each other in hallways that surgeons almost never say about fellows, that she had a sense of spatial intuition in the operating room that could not be taught, that her hands were remarkable, that she was going to change things. She was already beginning to. The procedure she developed, a minimally invasive approach to mitral valve repair that reduced recovery time by more than half, had been tested, refined, and filed as a series of 7 patents before Isla turned 30. Her research partner at Toronto General, a biomedical engineer named Hollis, told her the technology was worth building a company around. There were institutions ready to invest. There were surgical centers across North America asking when they could license it. And then her father called. He had been hiding the tremor in his hands for months, from colleagues, from the hospital, from everyone except Isla, who could always read him. When he finally said the word out loud, Parkinson's, progressive, she had listened without speaking. Then she had asked one question. "Do you want me to come home?" "No," her father said. "Don't be ridiculous." She came home anyway. She deferred the patents. She put every conversation about the company on hold. She took a part-time volunteer role in the cardiac rehabilitation ward at Vancouver General. Not in the OR, because stepping back from an OR is easier than stepping back in, and she managed her father's care. She cooked. She drove him to appointments. She read aloud from the journals they had both loved, since she was small, sitting beside him in the evenings the way he had once sat beside her. She never called it sacrifice. She called it the only thing she could have done and still live with herself. It was during those years, at a hospital fundraising gala she nearly did not attend, that she met Emmett Carmichael. He was charming in the particular way of men who have learned that charm is a tool, and he was drawn to her immediately, but not for the reasons a person would hope. He liked the story he constructed about her, the quiet woman who needed someone to organize her life, to give her direction, to lift her up. He liked being needed that way. It made him feel substantial. Isla, exhausted and grieving and lonelier than she had ever been in her life, let herself lean into the warmth he offered. She did not tell him about the fellowship, the procedure, the patents. At first she did not tell him because none of it felt like the most important thing about her in that moment. She had genuinely set it aside, and she had meant it. Later, she did not tell him because she had come to understand something painful about the man she had married. Emmett needed her to be less than him. Not consciously. She did not think. He knew he did it. But it was the shape of his love, the only shape it could take. Every time he introduced her at a dinner party as my wife, she does wonderful volunteer work at the hospital. She watched him relax into the sentence. Every small joke about how fortunate she was to have someone provide for her, he delivered with genuine satisfaction. The imbalance was not incidental to how he loved her. It was load-bearing. So she let him believe the story he'd built. And quietly, in the study at the end of the hall that he never once entered, she kept working. The bookshelves in that room held 4 years of continued research. The patents she had deferred were not abandoned. They were evolving. She had corresponded with surgical teams in Montreal and Calgary and Edinburgh. She had brought in remote consult. In the margins of her father's journal, in her own handwriting alongside his, she had continued to build something that was nearly complete. She had been waiting for a sign that the man she had married would someday, unprompted, knock on that door and ask what she was building, ask about the books on the shelves, the papers she printed and filed in the locked cabinet by the window. He never once asked. Her father died in March, in a sunlit room at Vancouver General, with Isla beside him, and the hand-stitched quilt his own mother had made across his lap. He passed knowing his daughter was loved, and the thing Isla could not tell him was more complicated than it appeared. She buried him, she went back to the penthouse, and she told herself there was still time to hope. She had been telling herself that for 2 years when she came home to find Faye Hollis wearing her throw and a coffee ring on her father's journal. That was not the moment something broke. That was the moment something finished. Emmett waited 3 days before he acknowledged to himself that she was not coming back. He expected anger from her, a tearful message, an ultimatum. What he got was silence. And silence from Isla turned out to be something he had no tools for at all. It filled the apartment, it sat in the study he now avoided walking past. It rang in the space where her habits used to be. The kettle at 7:15, CBC radio, low in the background, the sound of her turning pages late at night. On the 6th day, he called her phone. A recording told him the number had been discontinued. He hired Greer Sutherland, a private investigator who charged an extraordinary rate because he was extraordinarily thorough. Emmett asked him to find where Isla had gone and how badly she was managing. Greer called back in fewer than 48 hours. Emmett answered, expecting news about Isla. He got news about himself. "Mr. Carmichael," Greer said, "I need you to sit down." "I'm standing. What is it? Is she back in Kitsilano? Did she go back to the hospital?" A pause. "How much do you actually know about your wife?" Emmett laughed. "Everything. Hospital volunteer. Her father was a local cardiologist who passed away last spring. No surviving family. I've supported her completely for 4 years." "Almost none of that is the full picture," Greer said. The glass in Emmett's hand went still. "Your wife holds a medical degree from UBC, near the top of her graduating class. She completed a cardiothoracic surgery fellowship at the University of Toronto. Multiple supervising surgeons documented in writing that she was among the most gifted surgical fellows the program had seen in over a decade. She didn't leave the fellowship because she washed out, Mr. Carmichael. She left because her father's illness progressed and she chose to come home and sit beside him." Emmett's mouth had gone dry. He thought of every dinner party, every sentence. "My wife. She does wonderful volunteer work at the hospital." "There's more," Greer said. "Before she left Toronto, she had surgical technique and filed 7 associated patents. I had the filings reviewed by someone in the medical technology sector. He called them the most strategically significant cardiac IP in the Canadian biomedical space." A pause. "Mr. Carmichael, the technology your acquisitions team has been attempting to license for the past 18 months. The file your VP of Partnerships flagged as the company's single highest priority target belongs to your wife. She is the primary patent holder. She has been the entire time." Emmett sat down. He did not decide to. His legs simply stopped. "She also inherited her father's estate in full," Greer continued. "Dr. Isla Forsythe was not only a respected surgeon, he was a disciplined, quiet investor over 40 years. Combined with the projected valuation of the patents, your wife's net worth is conservatively estimated at just over $400 million. The apartment felt like a stage set. Everything in it suddenly looking like borrowed furniture from someone else's life. Why? Emmett said, his voice cracked on the word. Why would she stay and let me? He stopped. Because finishing the sentence required accounting for everything he had said and done and believed while she sat in that study 30 feet away from him. That's not my department, Greer said carefully. But in 20 years of this work, Mr. Carmichael, a person doesn't sit on $400 million to trick you. They do it because they're trying to find out whether you love them as they appear, just as they are, with nothing spectacular visible. Whether that's enough. He paused. Looking at the timeline of when she walked out, I'd say she finally got her answer. Find her, Emmett said. I can't, Greer said. There's a wall of legal protection around her movements. I've never seen around a private individual. Wherever she went, she planned it. This wasn't a woman stumbling out into the rain with nowhere to go. This was a woman who had somewhere to be and had known it for a long time. Emmett hung up. He stood in the apartment for a long time. Then he walked through it slowly, room by room, looking at everything differently. He opened the study door for the first time in 4 years. Bookshelves floor to ceiling. Surgical texts. Biomedical engineering journals. Stacks of printed research papers with her handwriting in the margins. A corkboard covered in diagrams and index cards connected by colored string. The visible architecture of a mind working hard on something very real. A locked cabinet by the window he had never once thought to ask about. She had been building something. Right here, in this room, while he held dinner parties and introduced her as someone he had rescued. He sat down in her chair and put his head in his hands. He did not sleep that night. 3 weeks later, every phone in his office building buzzed at once. His assistant knocked without waiting. Mr. Carmichael, you need to see this. On the television mounted on his office wall, a medical conference live stream, a stage, a podium, a room full of journalists, and standing at the microphone, composed and completely at ease, wearing a dark blazer and no jewelry at all, was Isla. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Dar, Surgery Pioneer, for the procedure expands globally. Dr. Forsythe. They were calling her Dr. Forsythe. She spoke without notes. She described the technology with a precision that made the journalists lean forward. When a reporter asked how long she had been working on this, Isla smiled. And it was a smile Emmett had seen across the breakfast table every morning for 4 years without once understanding it. Most of my life, she said, I simply wasn't ready to share it until now. Emmett's phone rang. Board chair Devin Aldridge. Tell me you're watching the news. I'm watching. Someone has been quietly purchasing shares in this company for the past month. Large blocks through a numbered company. We've identified the beneficial owner. Devin's voice was measured, the tone of a man choosing his words. It's Dr. Forsythe, Emmett, your wife. She holds enough of this company to formally request a board meeting, and she has in writing. She wants to be here Thursday. Emmett stared at the screen, at Isla's face, at the way she stood at that podium, not performing, not proving anything to anyone, simply being completely, and finally, exactly who she was. He understood then, not all of it, but enough. This had never been about leaving him. This had been about becoming. And while he had congratulated himself on the life he had given her, she had been quietly building one that made his look small. Thursday came. The boardroom on the 22nd floor was full. Emmett sat at the head of the table, because he still technically held the chair, but it felt like borrowed furniture. At 9:09, the door opened. Isla walked in alone, one slim folder, the same dark blazer. No jewelry. She looked at the board members and nodded once, and Emmett watched every one of them sit up slightly straighter, the involuntary response of people in the presence of someone who has stopped asking permission to occupy a room. She sat at the far end of the table, directly across from him, the length of it between them. Thank you for seeing me, she said. I'll be brief. She opened her folder and distributed copies down the table without assistance. What you're looking at? she said, is an independent analysis of this company's last 3 years. Declining R&D investment, 3 licensing opportunities missed. Your 2 most soy scientists recruited away to competitors within the past 18 months. I didn't commission this to embarrass anyone. I commissioned it because before I put my name near a company, I do my homework. I always have. The board chair was already reading, his eyebrows rising. This company is struggling, Isla said. Not because the science is poor, because the leadership stopped taking risks and started protecting the comfort of the person at the top. The technology your acquisitions team has been chasing for 18 months belongs to me. I'm prepared to license it to this company at favorable terms. I'm prepared to bring my team here and invest significantly in rebuilding what's been neglected. She paused. But not under the current leadership. That is my only condition. Emmett looked at her across the long table. So this is revenge, he said. You came all this way to take everything. Isla looked at him then, for the first time since she had entered the room, and what he found in her face was not triumph, not anger. The same thing he had seen the night she left, that exhausted, clear-eyed pity. You still believe this is about you, she said quietly. After everything, I planned years of research, filed 7 patents, completed work the surgical community is calling a generational advance, and you think I did it to hurt your feelings in a boardroom. She shook her head. None of this was ever about you, Emmett. That's what you can't accept. You were never the center of my world. You only believed you were because I let you. The board went into closed session. Emmett waited in the hallway, 35 minutes. When Devon opened the door, his face said everything before his words did. A decision had been reached, but Isla had asked for a moment alone with Emmett first. The room emptied. Just the 2 of them, the length of the table between them, November, rained sideways against the windows of the 22nd floor. You could have told me, Emmett said finally. Any evening in 4 years, you could have told me who you were. I could have, Isla said. And then what? The moment you knew I had money, the moment you understood what I'd accomplished before I ever met you, do you honestly believe you would have looked at me as a partner? Or as a threat? She folded her hands on the table. I didn't hide it to deceive you. I hid it because I needed to know whether you loved the woman who showed up every day. The one making tea in your kitchen and reading in the study down the hall. If that wasn't enough for you, if you could only see value in what I possessed, rather than in who I was, then there was nothing left to protect. He had no defense for this. I'm sorry, Emmett said, and he meant it with a depth he had never accessed before in his life. For the affair, for everything I said, for your father's journal. God, Isla, I didn't know what it was. I never asked about any of it. Something shifted in her face, the first real crack. No, she said softly, you didn't. Tell me how to fix it. Isla stood. She picked up her folder. She walked the length of the table until she was standing close to him, closer than they had been since the night she left. There's no way back, she said, but there might be a way forward. Not for us. That door closed the night you told me I came into this marriage with nothing, but for the people who work in this building and for what this company could still become, yes, there's a way forward. She looked at him steadily. The board is keeping you on as an advisor. I asked them to do that. Not for you, but because I know what it is to be told you are worthless, and I won't do it to another person. Not even to you. She moved toward the door. Isla, Emmett said. She stopped. Did you ever love me? Was any of it real? She did not turn immediately. When she spoke, her voice was low and level. All of it was real, she said. I loved you as completely as I have ever loved anyone outside my father. That's what made it so hard to leave. I loved a version of you that I'm not certain ever fully existed, a man who might someday be curious enough to knock on the door of the study down the hall and ask what I was building in there. He never came. She paused. We were strangers to each other, Emmett. The difference is I knew it, and I stayed anyway, hoping. You didn't even know there was something to hope for. She opened the door and walked out, and the board filed back in, and the company that bore his name passed quietly into a new chapter that did not have him at the head of it. In the months that followed, Emmett did something no one, including himself, had expected. He stayed. He took the advisor's seat. He sat at the end of the table instead of the head and watched the company become. Under new leadership and Isla's technology, something genuinely remarkable. The culture shifted. Engineers stopped leaving. Contracts came in that the company had been chasing for 3 years. He took no credit for any of it. He was not there for credit. He was there because he had decided, quietly and without announcement, to witness what he had nearly destroyed, and to learn from it. He began reading her surgical papers. He could not follow most of the technical language. He read them anyway. He started knocking before entering rooms. Small things, the kind that don't announce themselves as change until they have quietly accumulated into a different person. Isla did not come to the office often. Her own company in Toronto was growing faster than anyone had projected. The Forsythe procedure, named in surgical literature by the clinicians who adopted it rather than by her, was being performed in 14 countries. She was a keynote speaker at conferences where the most respected minds in the field came specifically to hear her think aloud. She carried herself through all of it with the same steadiness she had carried out into the November rain. The steadiness of a person who no longer measures herself against anyone else's understanding of who she is. What she was most proud of was not the recognition. It was the fellowship she established at UBC, in her father's name, the Isla Forsythe Fellowship in Cardiac Surgery Innovation, which funded young surgeons from low-income backgrounds who might otherwise never have the chance to develop what they carried. She had grown up watching her father believe that medicine should not be a privilege. She had never stopped believing it either. Nearly a year after she had walked out of the False Creek penthouse, a journalist asked her a question no one had thought to put to her before. Dr. Forsythe, there's a generation of women in surgical medicine who cite you as a reason they didn't give up. Did you ever imagine, during the years you were working in that hospital ward, that you would become someone others look to? Isla was quiet for a moment, genuinely quiet. When I was working in that ward, she said slowly, I was married to a man who told me I had come into his life with nothing. And for a while, in the quietest, hardest moments, some part of me almost let that become true, almost let him be the one who decided what I was worth. She paused. So if there is someone listening right now who has a person in their life defining the edges of who they're allowed to be, I want them to hear this. The people who tell you that you're nothing are describing the limits of their own imagination, not yours. Don't let someone else's small vision become the ceiling on your life. I almost did. Please don't make my mistake. The clip traveled. In a glass office in downtown Vancouver, an advisor named Emmett watched it on his phone in a quiet room. He knew she was talking about him. He felt no anger, no shame, not anymore, only something he could not quite name. A kind of reverence for the fact that she had taken the worst thing he had ever done to her and turned it into something that would help people for the rest of her life. Even his cruelty she had found a way to make useful. That was who she had always been. He simply hadn't looked. They saw each other a handful of times over the years that followed, always briefly, always at industry events. Each time, Emmett was careful in the way of a person who has learned the cost of carelessness. Each time, Isla was warm in the way of someone who has grown too certain of herself to be diminished by old wounds. At one such event, Emmett finally asked her about her father, about what Alistair had been like, what it had been like to grow up in that kitchen in Kitsilano with the medical texts spread out on the table. And Isla told him, not to absolve him, not from nostalgia, but because she had grown large enough to be generous, and because speaking her father's name to someone who was finally actually listening felt like the right thing to do. When she finished, Emmett was quiet for a long moment. The journal, he said, that night, I didn't know what it was. I know you didn't, Isla said. I should have asked. Yes, she said, you should have. She looked at him steadily. Carry that, she said, not as punishment, as a reminder that things have weight you cannot see until you decide to look. His name was on that cover, 30 years of his work, the whole shape of who I became. A pause. I don't need you to suffer for it, Emmett. I need you to be someone who would ask now before it's too late. That's all I ever wanted for you. Even when I was angry. Even when you didn't deserve it. She left the event not long after. Emmett stood by the window for a long time, watching the lights scatter across the inlet, the particular blue of a Vancouver evening settling over the mountains. He had stood beside Isla every day for 4 years and seen only what was convenient to see. A woman who fit the shape of the life he had already decided to live. He had never once thought to look past that shape to find out what she carried, what she was building, what she was worth in her own right. That was what he would carry, not as punishment, as a compass. There is a kind of blindness that has nothing to do with the eyes. It lives in assumption and pride and the comfortable certainty that we already know all we need to know about the people closest to us. It is the most common blindness there is. And it is the most expensive. Isla Forsythe walked out of a False Creek penthouse on a wet November night with one bag, her father's journal, and every credential and patent, an ounce of will she had been building toward her whole life. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her worth a turn. She was not leaving a life. She was returning to the one that had always been waiting for her, the one she had carried inside herself through every grief, every silence, every dinner party where someone introduced her as lucky. She had never been lucky. She had been brilliant and patient and capable of love that cost her something real. And when the moment finally came, she stepped into the light not to prove a single thing to a single person, but simply because it was time, and because the person who most needed to see her clearly had always been herself. Remember that, long after the story fades, let that part stay. The person beside you right now. The quiet one, the patient one, the one you think you already know. Maybe carrying something extraordinary in a room you've never thought to enter. Ask them about it. Ask them today, while they are still beside you and while you still have the time. Because the most important question you will ever ask someone you love is also the simplest one. Tell me who you really are. Ask it now, before life teaches you the answer the hard way.